Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. I hope everyone enjoyed a little bit of a break that we earned after a good deal of communication. The first part of this year, we took July off, and hopefully everybody got away and got some brain power back for this start of the school year. As we know, it hit us in a number of ways differently than we had hoped. But that doesn't stop our group and the progress that we've been making. So we're excited to get back to it. If you recall, during our June meeting, we actually did a series of breakout sessions. And those series of breakout sessions led to further refinement of our recommendations for what's going to go forward to the full continuum committee from our group. We also heard from our constituents. So we heard a lot from folks on the current recommendations that we have. And so we're excited to have additional conversations around what further partner feedback. And so Janae will walk us through that partner feedback today and working through a series of recommendation charts. So we've gotten far enough in this conversation now where we're able to organize the recommendations and actually provide a framework for how we want to deliver those recommendations to the continuum. And so we'll be doing that today. And we'll also be looking at what are the next steps for us as a group. And we'll talk about when the next full continuum meeting is, and of course, when our next meetings are. And so the person who has the meat, so to speak, of our information today is Janae. And so Janae, I'm happy to turn this over to you so you can walk us through both the recommendations and the feedback from all of the partner sessions that you had.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you all today and just really proud of the progress of this work group. And so, as Dr. Murphy said, we're going to kind of really just talk about and review what the thought partners had to say around the emerging recommendations. Then we're going to spend some time in breakout rooms just to kind of really reflect on their feedback, as well as figuring out how to make some of our recommendations actionable, and like identifying owners and some key priorities around each of those action steps. And then we'll come back together as a full group to discuss what your groups discuss. And so you'll get an opportunity to touch on at least two of the priorities in breakout rooms. So we'll do like 30-minute rotations so that, you know, you can have an opportunity to provide some input on, you know, whether it's a recruitment recommendation, a training recommendation, or a retention recommendation. You'll have some time to select two different options. And then Jennifer and Amanda will close us out and give us guidance on what we're doing next, okay? So come on, next slide, there we go. So to get us going, I want to go ahead and just take a moment and share what was presented and heard to the thought partners. So this past July, we convened a group of thought partners just to kind of get their input and insight on the work that you all have done across the last few months. It was a very diverse group of educators at the high school and post-secondary levels. There were also members from advocacy organizations, nonprofits, and chamber organizations. And so what we did was we shared the emerging recommendations, and we gained a lot of insight on ways to enhance the recommendations or things that we kind of need to address or refine. And so around two particular emerging recommendations was around the launch a compelling campaign. This group said, you know, we want to have a campaign that highlights the importance and benefits of entering the teaching profession, all of the benefits that come along with being a teacher, the value and the quality of life that comes along with being a teacher. And then we also lifted up the recommendation to enhance recruitment of future teachers and increase the numbers of teachers from underrepresented groups. So again, just highlighting the need for diverse educators within our work. Some of the thought partners gave us written feedback as to making sure that we have clear strategies around our campaigns and recruitment efforts, particularly around second career recruits, as well as candidates of color. And I'm going to throw out male candidates as well, right? We might as well go ahead and include that into the conversation if we're going to break down our campaign recommendation to be a little bit more specific and targeted. And then also the other comment around the campaign was centered on public awareness campaigns are not a good use of resources these days because media and other information is too dispersed. So again, just making sure that this group is intentional about, who do we want to target in this campaign? How do we want to roll out this campaign? Who's the audience? What's the mediums for that? And so that's something that we will do today. But again, taking into consideration and account this valuable feedback that they've provided. The second emerging recommendation that we shared with them was around creating a culture of support and collaboration that allows teachers to provide input and feedback on policy. And so what we heard from the thought partners was that, we need to learn how we should encourage school districts to look at their own data on success in recruitment and training teachers of color, and then develop a plan to address hiring and retention in their district, as well as training hiring committees is great, but hiring without retention is not helpful for anyone. And I think those 2 points are important, and I think they have been a focus of this particular group, right? That's how we've ended up with recruit, train, and retain. And so I think those are priorities for this particular work group. But again, what does a culture of support and collaboration look like? And so, and how do we create systems and structures for teachers to have input and provide feedback in a safe and meaningful way? That's something for us to kind of digest on a little bit and break down not this afternoon, but later on in the meeting. And so again, that is the response to that particular recommendation. And then the last recommendation that had feedback centered on our recommendation for investing in the development of mentoring programs for new teachers. We heard all throughout this process with engaging with stakeholders, K-tip, K-tip, K-tip. And then we had the thought partner feedback, and this is very important for us to talk about. And it said, if K-tip is going to be refunded, it should also be revamped, analyze what K-tip did well and what it did not. Many LEAs created their own programs to replace K-tip. Inventory these efforts to identify promising best practices that could be scaled. And so we know that there's a call and an urgency around teacher development. We heard it from this group, and we've also heard it throughout the stakeholder interviews and focus groups. And so we just kind of need to flush that out and really look at some components of whether it's K-tip or another mentoring program that we are aware of, to be able to really propose a set of recommendations that are targeted to key components of mentoring programs, or what would a new ideal mentoring program look like for Kentucky. And so these are the recommendations that we had feedback on or comments on that were but that really highlighted some things that we as a work group probably needed to address. And so these are the sets of recommendations that we have presented before thought partners. But again, these are the ones that had comments and feedback for us to consider. The other recommendations around like praxis and licensure pathways, they all resonated with the thought partners, and we did not have any significant comments or feedback related to them. So that does not mean they were not presented. Again, these are just the ones that thought partners had significant questions or comments about. And so I'm going to pause there because we did set some time for you all to make comments, recommendations, or just questions about what you just heard.
Janae, I think it's really tremendous that obviously the outcomes of what this group has been thinking resonated well with our thought partners. I know that there were quite a number of people who wanted to be on this group. And so the idea that we are capturing the general consensus of where we are and where we need to go, I think is tremendous. One of the things that I want to make sure, and you touched on it just there at the end, that we don't lose in our recommendations and in our conversations is the idea of licensure and how licensure matches the current workforce needs. Right now, I think we touch on it every time we talk about the praxis, and we need to move from a 5-year to a 10-year, which is important and will serve a number of access barriers and retention barriers for our students currently in the pipeline. But the kinds of certifications that we are offering, do they match what our principals and our districts need as far as hiring? And I think that is a pressure point for universities as well, because it costs quite a bit of money to support any number of licensure programs. So we want to make sure that the ones that we are supporting and making sure that the ones that students are completing to be teachers match what that district is. So I think as we move forward, if we could expand how we look at that licensure part beyond the praxis language, which we're all agreeable to, but I think the broader sense of does licensure match workforce needs is really a good question and recommendation.
Anyone else?
I also liked the comment about school districts and schools looking closely at who they're recruiting into teaching. We had a really interesting conversation with one of our area school districts a couple of weeks ago about this exact thing, where they were asking us at UK, you know, how are you recruiting diverse candidates into your programs? And I told them, I said, I have to be honest, you know, over 30% of our 30% of our student population is now out of state for our candidates, and a majority of our diversity lies in our out-of-state student population. If you look at our in-state population for recruiting into our college, it's terrible. And so then I asked, I said, you know, what does your teaching and learning pathway diversity look like? And they said, you know, not good. And that was something that they took a step back and said, oh, you know, maybe we need to be looking internally as well as to who we're recruiting and how we're recruiting into our teaching and learning pathway.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. I think Penny is highlighted. Okay, maybe not. Anyone else want to comment about?
I was just going to say, Margaret, with what you just shared from the university side with conversations with district partners, I think that speaks to, Janae, what you were talking about earlier around the intentionality of what that campaign would be, right? And so the idea that it's not necessarily a, you know, just public awareness campaign, it's a targeted campaign that has specific groups that we are, I mean, I just got a report this morning on our Hispanic population and how they're engaging in our education programs for our colleges. But the question is, what are our districts doing to also engage them in that conversation? And can that partnership be joint? So I think it's a point well made. And I think it speaks directly to that campaign idea that you had. Penny, were you trying to jump in there?
No, ma'am, but my audio is better when I am unmuted. So.
Well, we are happy to hear you any which way. So you stay unmuted and, you know, jump in whenever you want.
Oh, don't worry, I will.
I wanted to just, number one, the introspection aspect, I think, is incredibly important. And Margaret, you highlighted that. And then it was highlighted specifically in our recommendations. I know that we had a meeting earlier in the summer at Eastern Kentucky University and looking at diverse faculty, and really having a tough look at the percentage of faculty that was diverse and how that has decreased over the years. And so that introspection aspect is incredibly important at all different levels. And I think that's one thing that it's hard for us to, I think it's hard for anyone to do, is to critique yourself, and critique yourself, whether as an individual or as a group, as a whole. So I'm glad to see that that is coming to the forefront in these recommendations.
Hi, this is Bryn Martin in Northeastern Kentucky. I'm not seeing a lot about specific resources that are being offered. They might be overlapped in some of those ideas already, but it seems like we need more focus on trying to get minority children into, or students into, the affordable colleges and that kind of thing. So I don't know if you wanted to comment more on that and the kinds of scholarships and grants that maybe we can offer more of.
So for one, we highlighted some within the chart you received of some existing grow your own and scholarship programs available for students. And one of the questions that's tied to that row, Bryn, is what is the committee, this task force recommendations on how to expand those or better communicate about them? So those are some of the things that we kind of want you to help us with today. So like, if there's programs on there that you have not heard of and you've been in Kentucky, you need to say, hey, we need to make sure that the students who need these programs have access to this. And that could be tied to the campaign, right? Like making sure these programs around scholarships and opportunities are communicated to all students in communities in Kentucky. So by all means, yes, please bring that up and make sure that we are capturing that very component that you're describing there.
This may be totally unrelatable, but I do want to just throw this out here. I think another thing we need to just consider is how we are connecting what we're doing with innovative methodologies and just innovation in schools, because quite frankly, when you talk to kids today, they don't see the teaching profession as something that appeals to them, because it doesn't feel like an innovative, it doesn't feel like the space that they're familiar with all of the technology and all the things that are new and different for them. They see a 300-year-old field that, hasn't changed in 300 years. So I just think we have to address it holistically, because if we keep continuing to do what we've always done, and not saying that this isn't recycled, but it's also not new. We've done and tried a lot of these things, but the piece I feel we are really missing is how do we appeal and how do we essentially change the field so that it is appealing to current students to become teachers.
Yep, very great point.
So Roy, I love that. And I think one of the things that we need to, again, intentionality around that campaign is identifying who are we highlighting and bringing to the forefront, not just from a race, gender perspective, but also from a relevancy to students around excitement, right? So if there is a coding faculty member who needs to be highlighted because coding is, a super fun class that a whole lot of students love taking, and they need to see themselves as the coding, I want to say professor, but that's just the dean coming out of me, but the coding faculty member in that school district. And in the same way that we highlight quarterbacks and running backs and tight ends, there are 100 people that are on that team. And so, but how do we get them interested in the team? And obviously race and gender are going to be a big part of that, but also the excitement from the classroom. How do we highlight that?
Because nobody wants to be the place kicker, right?
Right, exactly, Penny. See, somebody's got my football reference. I was like, I'm about to do sports in front of educators. I don't know how that's going to go.
No, nobody wants to be the place kicker, the holder, the long snapper, or the punter. I get it. Yeah,
But they're important people.
they are.
We just don't use them on the recruiting.
Mhm.
Fred?
Yeah, one idea I think is to maybe have like some summer camp situations where it's there's fun and there's some interaction with teachers of different fields, you know, and they're having some workshops and maybe even some like live sessions where they could get a feel for what it feels like to teach difficult things, or and how that's made to be fun. Some sessions where there's involved with the teachers while they're coming up with policy, and they could kind of see what's involved there. I think it's good if they get a chance to see just how wide that task is. I think sometimes when you say teachers, they just think of teaching, and some might think that that's the whole thing. So if that bores them, but they might get excited when they see some of the planning part, the leadership, you know, the collaboration, coming up with policies, and the negotiations that goes on, that go on. So I'm just thinking a camp situation where you could do a variety of exposures and engagement.
One
If
of
I
the
could,
things- Go ahead, Sophie.
okay, if I could jump in, that reminds me of something that one of my school districts did that was like really phenomenal. They had a week, it was typically the week right before spring break. It's called Intercession. And they would give students the opportunity to job shadow somebody in the community for something that they're interested in. And they would often encourage students like, hey, you know, if you want to go job shadow like a former teacher, like go ahead. And like, that's actually how I decided I wanted to teach. I job shadowed my former 8th grade math teacher, and I spent an entire week with her. I got there before school started, and I would like help set up the classroom and get things ready. And I stayed with her during planning, and she actually let me teach class one day. And like, that's how I decided that, like, I was like, no, like, I really like this. And I got to see all of those aspects. And I think encouraging other districts, like you just said, to do something like that could be really beneficial and introduce students to the teaching field, or even if the teaching field really isn't for them, giving them an opportunity to then explore some other field that they're interested in for a week. So yeah, that's something that they did that was really, really cool.
I love Sophie's suggestion. I really love that. And I want to add to that, Brent. I know you're going to hop in there too, but I wanted to add to that. I think that just as crucial as having that experience to shadow is the messaging that comes along with the person who is helping that student, or the student is shadowing. Because one of the things that I've learned in just asking questions on my own is that quite often kids see a positive perspective of teachers and from teachers in elementary. They're positive about the teaching field, and mostly middle school teachers are pretty positive about the teaching field. But quite often when you get to high school, that may not be the case, where they hear more often, I've got 300 kids, I don't have enough time to plan, I don't get paid enough money, I have to do all this overtime, I have to work the game, I have to. So I think we also have to work with our teachers on messaging that, yes, there are things that come with the job, but there are also a lot of great things that come with the job as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to add, I think that's a wonderful idea. And I think a lot of schools do that. I think right now during COVID, we probably have to come up with some more things, because I was just learning that some of the hospitals who did shadowing had to stop that program. So it's making it harder for some of the kids who have to get so many hours before they can, you know, go further. So yeah, it's going to be interesting how we find a way to maybe do that. Depending upon how long COVID stays with us. But I also like some of the apprenticeship programs and, you know, the internship ideas. Those are really wonderful too. But I was just thinking that something like a camp where it could be more relaxing, you know, you're still learning and still have some fun activities mixed in. especially because as a teacher too, you have to learn how to do some different fun activities. So, you know, that'll give you a chance to do that. But yes, but shadowing and other ideas like that are very useful.
And I think when you put all those things together, and maybe this is, Sophie, I would welcome your thoughts on this. Part of this opportunity is about fellowship, right? Showcasing that teaching is not an isolated profession. You're not just in a classroom as an adult with, 30 kids or 30 adolescents, but it's more of, let's show them planning periods where there's actually teams of people who are coming together to talk about all the kids in the school and what the impact is there. And showing, staff professional development opportunities, but also staff fun opportunities. Principals do a tremendous amount of work making sure that the environment of their schools is a place that a teacher wants to work. And that we have to capture that in that day, that shadowing experience.
Yeah.
Dallas?
Well, I was just going to add to Bren. I think you're onto something there, Bren. And one of the avenues that we might want to look at, not just saying, if you're interested in teaching, come to this, but do a leadership focus so that along with teaching, they're getting some leadership traits. I did something like that at a university that I was in. We did a free summer camp for high school students. We had a great response based on teaching leadership, but then making it leadership in education, leadership through the classroom or something like that. So that way you can hit a couple of different venues at the same time, integrating teachers and having professors involved also. So just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all great ideas and recommendations that I really want you all to add to it, even though they were not on the list for refinement this afternoon. Please add them within the recruitment group and like really flesh them out, because they're really solid ideas and quality and like realistic, and like, they're able to be implemented or requested anyway. So what I want to do is just kind of give instructions on how we're going to spend the rest of our time, because this is going to be your time to do your work and kind of flesh this stuff out a little bit. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and just kind of let you know, give you a visual of what it is that we're trying to learn from you today. And so if it ever loads, there we go. I've been on Zoom for like 2 years and I'm still struggling, y'all. So thank you for your patience. So we kind of broke out the rooms based on the themes of recruit, retain, and train. That's kind of been our flow throughout this project. And then what I did was incorporated the recommendations that the thought partners provided us with feedback. So around the campaign, enhancing recruitment of future teachers, that's all going to fall under recruit. And so we'll have a breakout for recruitment. Under retain, one of the recommendations that we were going to just focus on there was centered around creating a culture of support and collaboration. And so we heard that a lot around whether it was diverse teachers, teachers of color, and just teachers in general. They felt like they needed to have a space or work at a school where they felt like they're supported, the administration valued their input, where we, had a focus group with some teachers of color who felt like, we need community. So that can all be revisited there under retain. And then for training, we kind of left that as the one, the investment in mentorship programs. And so we're going to have 3 breakout rooms focus on those emerging recommendations. Again, for those wonderful ideas this morning, please add them as appropriate. Like, so if it's in the recruitment group, the training group, whatever, make sure you bring them up. But what we really want to do today, right, is not just add things or like just revisit the emergent recommendations. We really want to leave here today with a clear sense of like, what are the next action steps related to these recommendations? Who are the potential owners of this work? So for instance, we're currently talking about camps, right? who would lead the camp work? Is that a DOE funding effort? Is that a state, a legislative ask where we can get funding for districts that have these camps or experiential learning opportunities? Like, just kind of flesh these things out. And also, if possible, and if your group is able to do it, like, what is the potential time frame for these steps, right? Is this something that can be accomplished in 6 months, a year? Like, how long do you think this will be in order to be implemented? And so I'm going to facilitate the training room. Amanda and Jennifer will facilitate recruit and retain. And so you'll have support. We do have some prompting questions that are in that chart that we kind of wanted you to think about before we came together. And so we'll walk you through each of those recommendations. And so I'm also going to show you what the template looks like real quick, just so you can kind of have the idea of how we're going to structure it. I'm like a visual person, so I kind of need to know what's happening. So I'm going to just show you this real quick and then just go through the instructions one more time. Here we go. Share screen. I have too many windows open, y'all. It's like, help me. Okay, here we go. There we go. So basically, this is what your facilitator is going to be trying to fill out. So we have the recommendation at the top. What we want to focus on is here. What is the action? So again, like the detailed action, and this, you know, we can fill this up as much as we need. Who are the owners? So is that Department of Ed? Is that, you know, a university institution? Is it districts that we're asking? What is the timeline? And then what kind of ask is this? Like, is it a legislative ask? Is it a budgetary ask? And if we have time, and groups may, we just kind of want to know what are some potential challenges to implementing these recommendations. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing today for the next hour. Is just to give you some time to really flesh out these ideas. So I'm going to give you instructions and give you a minute to ask questions real quick. So what we're going to do, just to be clear, because I just threw a lot at you, we are going to break out into breakout groups. So Joette has set up some breakout rooms for you to choose. Select the breakout room that you want to contribute to. We will spend 30 minutes refining and unpacking the emerging recommendations, and then we will rotate at 30 minutes so that you have an opportunity to contribute to another recommendation. And so I'm just asking that in your final group, if you can identify a reporter to be able to share out what was discussed within your breakout groups. And so I'm going to pause for a second to see if anyone has any questions. All the ideas mentioned seem to be part of launching the Compella campaign. Yes. So yes, Sherry, that is a great idea, just to go ahead and kind of flesh that out there. Great point. And Dr. Murphy, you mentioned earlier around licensure, you know, we can tie it into the practice recommendation, but we can also tie it into the recruitment conversation if you want to as well, or the training. So wherever you feel it fits best, we can add that and flesh it out.
It may be in all three, Janae.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I would also consider the leadership conversation, Dallas, that you brought up, even with the third recommendation around the teacher mentoring and coaching, because I think a lot of times we overlook our teacher leaders and they are key for new teachers. So I just want to bring that up. That may not just be a recruitment or retention. It could be, it is a retention, but I think even that leadership development can fit into several too. I think there's some key pieces in that.
Exactly.
Agreed.
So I'm going to let Joette set us up with the breakout rooms. Again, select the rooms that you want to go to first for the next 30 minutes. And your facilitators will meet you there. So it's a highlight at the bottom, breakout rooms. I can't even get to my room. Here we go.
Janae, I'm not just hanging out. I'm waiting. I'm looking to see how many people are falling in each area.
Figure out how to get to my room. Oh no.
We needed more time. Such great conversations.
In the middle of a sentence.
I blame Janae.
I was trying to get an acronym from Dr. Murphy.
It is always blame Murphy. Always.
Good to know.
Fine.
Well, I hope you all had great discussions around the recommendations and unpacking them and getting some next steps. I hope they were as fruitful as my group. And shout out to the individuals who came to join me because I was lonely. So I appreciate you all. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with recruit and then retain. Well, recruit, train, and retain. I'll do it that way. Recruit, train, and retain. So I gave instructions and got cut off for identifying a reporter. So I think train, we might have to collectively help each other on report out. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen because I'm not a great note taker because I just get so enthralled in the conversation. But Bren has agreed to share some highlights of our conversation, and then I'll fill in the blanks from the first group because there's some different conversations that took place. So Bren is very brave, and I think she just felt really sorry for me. So tell me when you all are able to. Oh, whoops! If you are able to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Brenda, you want to start off, and I'll pull, this is mainly where we had our conversation in both conversations or both groups.
Okay. I probably won't be reading from there. That's a little hard for me to see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. That's fine. You'll cover if I miss it. Yes, we had wonderful discussions, and we talked about doing a summer intensive. They were referring to the type of governor scholars type of program for education. And one of the things I'd asked about was getting credits toward their pathway, and how important it is to connect that to their long-term goals. And they were talking about building relationships, including at-risk students. Someone focused on first generation. I can't remember her name. I'm sorry. The other young lady in the group was talking about making sure that we target first generations, low income areas, and making sure that everyone has a chance to take advantage of this type of intensive and summer programming. We talked about getting, Lisa had mentioned a good idea of making sure that we're not just focusing on giving them information, but getting information from them in terms of finding out what they think education could be, allowing them to explore and think of what they picture it turning into and how we could help make it happen. We talked a lot about the different, trying to get the students to go into a CTE, not just looking at the direct teaching pathway, but looking at some variations of that they might not consider. And one of the ladies mentioned that when she goes into the school, she sees more white males in those areas. So we definitely need to try to increase our diversification there and try to target different groups and help them to see the incentives of coming into these areas. And I'll turn it back over to Amanda.
Yeah, Bren, thank you so much. You're very kind. Then you did a great job. You did a great job. So we did talk a lot about the summer opportunities, and not just for students, but also for employers and for professional learning opportunities to really elevate. And one of the things that's really stood out in my mind on top of that conversation that Bren summarized really well is, I think it was Vivian that brought up that our recommendation 1 and recommendation 2, which was 1 is the compelling campaign and 2 is the recruitment of underrepresented groups, really shouldn't be two separate recommendations. It should really fill in beautifully as one, because we can't just do this over here and then just this over here. And so I thought that was such a really strong, powerful statement. The other thing we talked a lot about too is that the partnerships, like military has a great partnership with KDE to recruit our CTE teachers, which we struggle terribly to find folks in those expertise. How do we elevate that? How do we target that audience specifically to really strengthen that? Many times the employers in our community, our largest employer in many of our communities is our school district, but they sometimes typically just post a job and hope that somebody comes. But how do they really own elevating education? And one of the last things I just wanted to bring up, we had so many good conversations around opportunities, but how do we talk to this generation of students who don't plan to probably sit and teach in a classroom for 30 years doing the same thing? How do we really promote it as an opportunity instead of your lifelong career? Because we all talked about that, even though we may be in the same field, we've been in all different roles, but again, we never talk about it. And so we talk about teaching, but we don't talk about how you can be in policy, how you can be in post-secondary, how you can work for private organizations as their educator, their lead educator. So there's lots of opportunities, and how do we elevate that when we are talking to students about going into the education field? So it's not just recruiting directly into the classroom, but really recruiting into our field. And so great conversations. I'll stop there, but it was so robust, and we could have literally talked about this all day. But I really, really love the take-home part of intentional recruitment, intentional opportunities to learn about our education field, not just teaching, and how we really can combine those two recommendations, that one complements the other. And so I felt like that was the really powerful communication, and that we've got to think and do differently. And I think Soraya called it future forwardness, and like, how do we really talk about education moving forward as we move forward into the future?
Awesome. And I'm going to steal your idea of like sharing the screen so we don't forget.
Yeah, please.
And we can, there we go. Now my eyes are bad. So we had Train, which was originally invest in mentoring programs for new teachers. And I'm just going to recap for the first group and then let the folks from the second group discuss. So, the conversation came if, K-TIP or a new form of K-TIP came to be, that there's like an accompany strategy centered and focused on women of color, so Black and Latinx women, but to really have this to be a grassroots effort that is developed locally at a district level. And they had a great idea, Soraya and Penny, around letting this to be a RFP process where women of color can create a culture and environment for them, and to address their specific needs, particularly around leadership development and opportunities and navigating all of the social construction things and biases that we have to navigate in the workplace. Also embed cultural competency and equity training and teacher prep programs. And so including this within, undergraduate and graduate programs, really centered around inclusive pedagogy, and being clear on what the goal is for that. And the next step for that will be having conversations with educator prep programs. And so maybe that's a conversation with KACTE and KDE to have a discussion on. And then I'm going to pause there and let the new group share out on the last two. So Sherry and Vivian, if you want to.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about expanding the workshops. I'd mentioned in both groups actually about Advanced Kentucky has partnered with KDE to offer an ACS, which is an approval code to teach computer science. And that is available to current high school certified teachers, and it can be any high school certified teacher. And so looking at that particular model, it's been really successful in the past couple of years that we've been able to offer it. And looking at that particular model as number one, it provides recruitment for areas in shortage areas, such in this case, computer science and STEM, but using it as a springboard, as a possibility for addressing shortage areas across, across the board is so a way to train teachers that are already certified. And so looking at that as a potential model. And then I will pass the baton on to Vivian if she wants to talk about the Leadership Academy.
Talk about providing leadership opportunities and what that would look like for professional development for our teachers. So we were talking about different things like Lead Kentucky and Leadership Louisville or Leadership Lexington or the Governor's Minority Management Training Program, or those type of programs that really could show stepping stones or show the different pathways that we've been talking about to further one's career path in the field of education. So we thought that was important. And we also thought about how to connect that to the mentoring piece that we also talked about, and how we can use these type of leadership programs to connect people virtually across the state to find that mentor, to find that person to kind of address those barriers and challenges that you might be having, and that you might need that support, that network, the opportunities to just share, to have that camaraderie, to find someone that looks like you in the profession that may be having some of the same issues or challenges, or even share some other opportunities and potential pathways for advancement that maybe you haven't had the opportunity to be exposed to or have an opportunity to participate in. So we had a lot of good discussion around those things, and I will turn it back over to Dr. Murphy. She wants to add anything.
I saw a couple of people participating in the chat as we were reporting out, which I think is great. And when we were looking at our particular group from this last round, it was really, as Vivian said, the idea of creating networks for leadership development, but mentorship. And so we're seeing a lot of the same themes and trends really roll around. And I appreciate the way that we've captured these into the three different buckets. Dallas, your point of the internships earlier, I think, or the apprenticeships, I think is really one that we want to make sure we also capture in these recommendations. And I know for Lieutenant Governor Coleman, the idea of a paid student teaching experience in some way, shape, or form really reduces some of the access barriers. So I do think we want to take that into and probably add where that needs to be in the three different documents that you provided as a framework for us, Janae. So I think that that's really good. Are there any other questions from the three groups or ideas that the three groups? Thanks, Dallas. Yes, help would be good in that area.
And
Are
Dr.
there
Murphy,
any?
don't forget, we have not discussed pain.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, that's an important thing.
See, you leave the group and then you just want to blow it off completely.
You know, I had no autonomy in where I was going the last hour. So
Sure.
Train
Well,
away.
I think first I'll just start off by saying it's amazing, to your point, Dr. Murphy, how the three really coalesce. So many of the ideas really are interlocking, which makes perfect sense, but I think it's reassuring that it kind of all comes full circle. So the recommendation, just as a reminder quickly, and then Sophie is going to share out and report because she took amazing notes. The recommendation really was create a culture of support and collaboration that allows teachers to provide input and feedback on policy. And what the engagement, the stakeholder engagement really told us is that teachers want to feel as professionals and collaborative partners in the decision-making process and matters that impact their teaching or students. So we've got lots of good considerations for action. And Sophie, I'll let you kind of fly through those for us.
I think we just lost her.
Oh no. What is it about this group? Everyone keeps leaving retain. I don't get it. Is the point of retain? We want to retain people. Okay, well, I will fly through then. So we talked, just as the other groups did, leadership training, but really kind of two purpose, one for in-service. What does that look like when we're growing teachers, but then, or pre-service rather, and then also in-service. So once we have teachers, how do we continue that system of support really, as Amanda said, to help teachers picture themselves as, if you want to stay in the classroom, that's great. And if you're thinking about other things, whether it's policy or administration, but really providing those supports and mentorship to help teachers think about those things. Talked a lot about, and Bren talked about this, teacher camps. So whether it's kind of working with teachers and future teachers, but then having teachers the ability to kind of grow and evolve throughout these camps so that eventually it's really a leadership position as they move on. Really kind of helping teachers, and this is for in-service teachers, really flesh out what it is that they want to do. So maybe revamping the professional growth plan and thinking about it on a much more individualized basis. Formalizing then intentional feedback channels. So obviously we know teachers are on SBDM councils, but how do we really make it a culture in which we continually seek and value teacher input in the decision process? Let's see. Celebrating educators. Dr. Murphy, you spoke a lot about this, but really being intentional on maybe even developing guidance so that we are having different scale and spread of awards and really refining the purpose of them. So whether it's around certain categories, but what does that look like to be really intentional, and then continuous celebration, whether it's at the district, the school, the state, region level, but just really highlighting the profession in general, which goes back, of course, to recruitment as well. And then we looked at revamping perhaps Kentucky Teacher, right? The premise of Kentucky Teacher was to highlight best practices and excellence, and using social media to do this. And Dallas really helped us think about, you know, the importance of this in terms of scaling and spreading, that we love to share these stories. So that could be something that could really help with retaining teachers and celebrating teachers. And if did Sophie join us?
Yes, I'm here. We
Good.
just lost power, so I'm on my phone.
No
right
worries, no worries.
now.
So anything else that you might want to quickly add, and then we'll kick it back over to Janae.
So I think I heard part of it. I just wanted to say one of the things that we talked about a lot in the second group that I thought was really, really wonderful and important was this idea of we were kind of coming up with a lot of kind of trying to work around problems and stuff, and trying to put in these policies to make it safe for teachers to give feedback, and making sure that this feedback is being used and capitalized on, when really if we just had these cultures in the first place that are positive and encouraging and have this collaboration, then we don't need those extra more formal methods of giving feedback. And so I don't know if we really got to kind of well, how do we even go about doing that? But we kind of talked a little bit about encouraging these community and business leaders and PTA and school and administrators and districts to kind of have more collaboration and building it more as a community and less as a hierarchy. So yeah, I think that was the only other thing maybe.
No, yeah, super, super important. Changing culture, not easy, is it?
Well, thank you for all of your engagement and your input today. I think what my next steps is that we're going to take all of what we heard today, which is really, really good. We unpacked a lot today. And Amanda, and I mentioned this in my last group, that Amanda and Jennifer and the leadership that they're working with are really into the actionable steps and how to implement them. And so we're going to try to really take what you presented today and create a report that they can take to their leadership to be able to say, here are the recommendations, and give them an opportunity to prioritize them. And so I'm going to yield to Amanda, I think, to just kind of close us out and present on any next steps.
Yeah, so today was fantastic. Actually, it exceeded my own expectation on what we could accomplish in a small amount of time. And it really solidified for me how we can really narrow this and have specific asks. So thank you so much. What we will do is our next meeting is September 23rd. And so depending on how far we get with this and get with leadership, we may not meet in September and we may. So stay tuned, because if we can narrow down what you gave today, there may not be a need to rehash again. And we're about efficiency because we know how busy you all are. So if there's not a need to meet, we won't meet for the sake of meeting, because that's my pet peeve. But I do want to make sure we capture this. If we have any weird questions that pop up or something that's unclear, we may reach out by email and say, just clarifying for the group, this is what was intended, because we want to make sure we capture the voices of our work group that you guys have done. But I feel solid about this. I'm really excited. And I think you really captured even what the field told us in May of what was needed. And I just am so appreciative of your efforts today. So stay tuned. We'll be in touch, but definitely, Janae, that's definitely our next steps. And we'll start to compile this, put this together, and owners. And then I know Dr. Thompson and Commissioner Glass and Lieutenant Governor Coleman are very anxious to see these recommendations because they are ready to move. So we have to like simmer them down. Sometimes we like just trust the process. It's going to come, but they're just really anxious and appreciative of the voice. So I think that's all I have. So thank you all so much for your time. You have 1 minute to spare, and we will be in touch and appreciate your time. Thanks.
Yes, and Margaret, to answer your question, tentatively September 17th at 12 p.m. But we will go ahead and present these recommendations to the Continuum co-chairs, and pending if they feel like there are enough considerations to kind of put in a narrative format, then we won't need to meet. And but if you would like to watch it, just to put it out there, September the 23rd at 1 p.m. is when the Continuum.
And we'll send that out.
Yeah,
but we can hold on to
when they'll actually hear these recommendations.
Yes, and do hold on to the October meeting. Hold on to that one, because we want to talk about what comes next. So what that looks like
October
moving
12th,
forward.
and we'll send that out too.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys.
Great conversations as always.
Yes.